Welcome to everyone to the new FlatWhite Podcast with myself as host, Pablo Marcos. I'm a professional coach for cycling and triathlon who's been in the sport for many years now. I have been lucky to spend most of my educational years in the UK, where I fell in love with the world of cycling and triathlon, long distance triathlon. And one of the first things that I was introduced to was the FlatWhite stops for a break with cake in the UK on my social ride. So we thought that this could be a great name for this new podcast, where we're going to spend a few hours with some of the legends and most important people in the sport, talking about everything related with their performance, their training, where they're coming from, and mostly just having a bit of a great time with them in the format of a little break with FlatWhite. And yeah, we hope that you enjoy this first podcast with one of the first guests that we're going to have, which is the legend himself of Babbitt, one of the most important and influential people in the sport of triathlon and Ironman in particular. He's been in the sport for pretty much the 40 plus years that the Ironman Hawaii has existed, since the first days in Oahu. And we talked with him about how the sport has evolved, how Ironman sport and racing has changed throughout the last years, what's the current situation of our sport, how it's growing with all the different brands and organizations making races, and how he sees the athletes and the equality of the sport moving on. So yes, hopefully you enjoy it. Leave in your comments whether you like it or not, any recommendation or any person that you would like to be interviewed, and we'll leave you with the podcast. Okay, so here we are for the first time on my podcast with one of probably the faces of long distance triathlon. A lot of people know him from his show Breakfast with Bob, but I think there's quite a lot more to him than just that show. And it's an honor for me and a pleasure to have you here, Bob. You are obviously well known for Breakfast with Bob, but you've been in the sport for quite a while. You are in your 60 to death age group category after competing in many events. Have been inducted into the Hall of Fame of many organizations, LA Marathon, USA Triathlon, Ironman Hall of Fame as well. What people might not know is you also are co-founder of the Competitors magazine, and you've got your radio show, Babbitt. You are also co-founder of the Challenge Atlas Foundation. So yeah, it's not like you haven't been busy over the last few years or decades, we could say.
It's been a lot of fun. First of all, Pablo, thank you so much. It was great to meet you in Chamarrin, and love what you're doing and love the energy that you're bringing to our sport.
Thanks a lot. So the first thing that I wanted to go through on this chat that we're having is kind of set the tone of the interview, because a lot of people know you for all the shows and interviews that you do in the sport, but many people don't know that there's a background behind this, and it's not only in triathlon, but you also hosted a competitive show where you had some of the most influential and greatest sports personalities, and probably even before that, we could go into your triathlon days as one of the first people that competed at the Ironman in Hawaii, not just in Kona, but also in Oahu on the third edition, if I'm correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
I guess that the first thing is probably let's chat a little bit about where is Babbitt coming from, all the way to where he is now.
Whoa. Okay. So, well, I was living in Chicago, Illinois, and then moved to San Diego in 1978. And was rock climbing down in Mexico, and I met a guy named Ned Overend, who went on to become world mountain bike champion. But this is before mountain bikes were invented. So this goes back to like 78, 79. And Ned and I met rock climbing and became roommates. And we read an article in 1979 in a magazine called Sports Illustrated about this weird event called the Ironman Triathlon on the island of Oahu. And in 1978, 15 starters, 12 finishers, and in 79, 15 starters, 12 finishers. It was one of those things where we read the article and it talked about the guy who won the race in 79, a guy named Tom Warren. Well, Tom lived in San Diego and he had a bar here called Tug's Tavern. And Ned and I knew of Tom because he created one of the first endurance events. He created a swim, run, swim event called the Tugs Swim, Run, Swim, where you swam a half mile around this pier, you ran 5 miles on the beach, and then you swam around the pier again. But more importantly, when you came across the finish line, you kept running because his bar was like 3 blocks away, and the first 75 people to get to the bar got free breakfast and a Tug's glass. So that was the thing is you wanted to finish in the top 75 because 76th person got nothing. So you want to be sitting there with your plate with your runny eggs and your glass from Tug's to show that you had finished and they had gotten nothing. So Ned and I actually did this event and we read about Tom Warren winning the Ironman. And we're like, oh, we got to track this guy down because there was no internet. There was no way to track down events. So we tracked down Tom Warren and said, we met with him. Can you tell us about this crazy event? And so he actually took us to his house. He had a bike mounted in his sauna, and he would ride 5 hours a day to train for this Ironman thing. And he had a motorhome that he would drive to the beach every day, and he'd go swim out in the ocean, and he'd ride his bike up to Oceanside, which is like 30 miles each way around to turn around. So he'd ride 60 miles, and he did a 5 mile run. So he was basically doing the Ironman every day before there was an Ironman. That was basically his lifestyle. So we realized we probably need to get bikes to do this thing. And so we both went to the police auction, and my bike was $75, and the whole back end had been burnt in a fire. And since we really didn't know much about the event, I had panniers, sleeping bag, and tent put on the bike because I thought you swam 2.4, rode 56, camped out, and then rode back the next day and did the marathon. We had no idea that you did the whole thing in one day. And it was a little bit of a surprise when Ned and I get over to Kona and we find out get over to Oahu and find out that most people are planning to do this thing in one day. So, and back then, no roads were blocked off. You had to have your own support crew. I was a school teacher, so one of the kids I taught, her dad lived over in Oahu and was going to be my crew. And, who knew what to eat and drink? So I gave him like 30 loaves of Hawaiian sweetbread and gave him my Gatorade because we didn't have any clue. So during
you had a Big Mac and fries at mile
my
25.
Crew, yeah, my crew gave me Big Mac fries and a Coke at mile 25. And then they gave me a root beer snow cone at mile 70, 75. And then at the end of the bike ride, we come riding in and I've got a radio on the top of the bike so I can listen to tunes throughout the bike ride. It was bungee corded on there. I come riding in and I hear this music and I hear this my crew has a bamboo mat laid out and they're like, how about a massage? And I'm like, my neck is really tight. So I laid down and got a 45-minute massage between the bike and a run and then got up and they actually had scales throughout the bike and the run course. So they weighed you before the race, and if you lost 5% of your body weight, they pulled you out of the race. So you had to get off your bike numerous times and then during a run as well. So I finish my massage and I get weighed and I start waddling through Waikiki. I'm eating Hawaiian sweetbread and drinking Gatorade. And I get on the scale at mile 5 and I can hear the guy in the walkie-talkie. He's like, can you give me that again? The guy's gained 4 pounds. You can't gain weight doing this thing. Then we're running.
To put that in context for European people, 4 pounds is about nearly 2 kilograms of weight put on through that first 2 segments.
Exactly. You're not supposed to be gaining kilograms, you're supposed to be losing. So anyways, then we're running up Diamond Head and my crew is behind me in their little Fiat convertible and they're lighting up the road. And I'm thinking, this is the coolest thing. I'm actually going to finish this thing in one day. I thought it was going to take me 2 days. And I come dropping down into Kapilani Park and I see a chalk line across the road and I see a light bulb above my head and I hear this voice in the darkness. It's like, hey, you. Yeah. You in the race? Yeah. You're done. I was like, I was thinking there was going to be bands, there's going to be cheerleaders. There was no Mike Riley. There's nothing. There's one guy in the park doing one-arm push-ups and me. And I had just finished the most amazing accomplishment of my life, finishing this Ironman thing. And as I walked back to my hotel, which I share in a room with Ned, so Ned's girlfriend, who eventually became his wife, Pam, she lost him a mile into the bike ride. And so when she found him, he was in the median strip drinking out of sprinklers at mile 90. And when I got back to the hotel room, I walked into the room and the moon was coming through the window and his back was like burnt red. And he just rolled over and said, I didn't see her all day long. He was just fried from this thing. But it was like, there was something about this Ironman that I just done that told me that I could accomplish anything. It changed right there. I knew that I was changed. There was something about that event that was so cool. I needed to share that with other people. So I came back and I was running a PE program, and there was a guy with a magazine name or newspaper called Running News, and I went to see him. His name was Mike Plant. And I went and said, Mike, this sport of triathlon, which he'd been covering, early triathlons were here in San Diego. And so we ended up changing the name to Running and Triathlon News. I left teaching, became LA editor for Running and Triathlon News. And every weekend we drive up to LA and cover these triathlons and running events. And it was the coolest thing ever.
I think
in 1980, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I think that what a lot of people don't know is that obviously you were a PE teacher before you actually step into triathlon like full time, let's say.
Yeah.
But you, correct me if I'm wrong, but before, you are in some ways the guy that started the Iron Kids raid within that PE teacher program, because we always see now how a lot of families around the events, they have the Iron Kids race the day before, and that's something that you actually brought up and started during your PE teachers days, right?
Exactly. So this Ironman thing was so cool, and all the kids at the school were really excited about it. So I decided to create a little triathlon at the school. So the kids would do a run and then an obstacle course. And then we actually had a pool in the complex. They go over to the pool and they'd swim in a pool. And I went down to Mexico, and we had the Incredible Hulk was popular at the time. And they would do these banks, it was like an Incredible Hulk. It was made out of clay, right? And kids would put pennies and stuff inside it. It became like a bank, right? So I bought a couple dozen of those Incredible Hulk things. He's holding a tree or whatever, and that became the trophy for the first ever Iron Kids triathlons. And so what happened is, this Mike Plant, I said, Mike, I'm doing this Iron Kids thing with the kids at my school. You should cover it. And he goes, why don't you write it up? And I said, well, I never wrote anything before. He goes, well, I'll give it a try. So I wrote this article about, the helicopters hovering over the start of the Iron Kids triathlon, sort of a spoof, just sort of a joke. And he loved it. And he says, I want you to write more stuff. So I started creating characters for his magazine, the Running Wino, the Old Fart of the Month, the Reverend Campagnola, Minister of Triathlism, just really goofy, silly stuff. And he said something to me there that really made an impact. So this is after writing all these funny columns for a while. And he brought me in his office, and he had 2 piles of letters, right, on his desk. And back then, if I didn't like your show, I could, back then I couldn't send you an email, right? If I didn't like what you were doing, I would have to sit down, write a letter on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, mail it. You had to really care if you were going to do that. So Mike had these piles of letters, and one pile was this Running Wino. This guy who's writing the Running Wino is really, I can't believe he's doing that. I'm an alcoholic. This is really inappropriate. Then the other was, this guy is hilarious. I love what he's doing. The Old Fart of the Month is great. Reverend Campagnola cracks me up. He goes, Bob, the one thing you want in life is you want passion. You don't want vanilla. If somebody didn't care about what you were writing, they're not taking the time to write a letter, put a stamp on it, and mail it. The fact that both sides of these, but the people who hate what you're doing and love what you're doing, took the time to write a letter and send it in shows that you're doing the right thing. Keep doing what you're doing. And that was a huge lesson for me, is passion is what it's all about. So I think I brought a passion to the sport of triathlon so when Running and Triathlon News went out of business in 1986, I started, along with my partner Lois, Competitor Magazine. And we didn't know what we were doing. We had some friends gave us a check for $17,000 and said, go start your own magazine. And our first print bill was $20,000. So we were in the hole $3,000 from the very beginning. We were under 10,000 pounds of bike racks in a guy's garage. That was our office. It was costing us $200 a month for 200 square feet of office space. It was a really teeny space, but we loved what we were doing. And it was one of those things. I lived on friends' floors for the first 3 years. We didn't pay ourselves. And eventually we grew that from one edition of Competitor Magazine to 11 editions around the country, 500,000 circulation. And that led eventually to a group of a private equity firm out of New York loving what we were doing, loving our brand Competitor, investing us. A private equity firm bought us, and it became the Competitor Group. So we owned Competitor Magazine, Triathlete Magazine, Velo News Magazine for cycling, Women's Running Magazine, then the Rock and Roll Marathon, which was 7 events. I had a series that I created called the Muddy Buddy Ride and Run series. 2 people, a mountain bike, mud pits. I was in a frog outfit. It was really a silly, fun event, but we had 7 of those. And over the next, and then 4 women's half marathon series events. Over the next 4 years, from 2008, 2012, rock and roll went from 7 events to 34 to 650,000 participants, 60% women, changed the whole face of running. And then Muddy Buddy went from 7 events to 18, 40,000 people crawling through mud pits. And I had, Chris McCormick and Chrissy Wellington, and a number of the pro triathletes would come out and join me in the mud pit. I officiated at a dozen weddings as Mr. Frog in the mud pits. It was the Muddy Buddy was just a blast. We had a lot of fun doing that series. And the nice part about it is everything we did, especially with Muddy Buddy, our official charity was our Challenge Athletes Foundation. So everything was a little hand in glove. Everything worked together.
Mm-hmm. That's impressive. You've gone through so many phases from those early days to where you are now, which people don't realize that all that journey that you had behind you. So it's impressive to hear from in first person from you, because when we were in Samorin, we spoke about how the scene of triathlon has changed to some extent, but how the roots of it still remain the same.
Yes,
and you brought one word, which is passion. And I think that we talk about that in Samorin, and we spoke how a lot of people join the sport because of what it means, what it feels, and what it represents still nowadays. And and that whole journey, to some extent, although it began with triathlon, with the Ironman event, you brought that into your own personal life and professional life. And I think that applies to a lot of the age groupers, professionals, and it becomes a way of living in that regard. So it's impressive. Regarding to that, I think that I've heard you saying before that one of the reasons why triathlon and Ironman is so important and it means so much to people is that it's probably one of the few sports where you can be the top professional, or you can be the last age group crossing the finish line at midnight, and you're still covering the same course, the same mileage, the same conditions. And it's almost like we're all equal on that day, and it doesn't really matter. It's that personal journey for everyone. It doesn't matter if you do it in under 8 hours or in 17 hours. It's what it represents to people. So you've gone through a lot during your years involved in the sport professionally, but also you've raced a lot as well, and you've had the chance of interviewing probably some of the greatest personalities in the sport of triathlon. and all the sports. But what would be your message if you had to summarize one thing, or what's the most powerful thought that you could have from those interviews that you can share with age groupers or anyone who wants to do an Ironman or a triathlon and still is hesitating, or they don't know whether that's going to be the right choice for them in their lives?
What I realize over the years and how the sport has changed and has not changed, it's that same sense of not the same sense of adventure that I had when I jumped into Sans Souci Beach back in 1980, not having a clue if I could swim 2.4 miles or ride 112 or run 26.2. That's the attraction. The numbers are staggering. When you start looking at, oh my God, I'm going to do this thing that's going to take me up to 17 hours in one day. This is the silliest thing in the world, but it changes you for the better. I always say what's great about our sport is, especially as you age, it's an equal opportunity abuser. It doesn't care if you're missing a leg or missing an arm. It doesn't care if you're 80 years old or 50 years old or 40 years old. It is something that you can do for the rest of your life. If you're a runner, when you get to be 50 years old, the reality is you're not running any faster. You're not running faster at 50 than you did at 40. But as a triathlete, I can buy a better wetsuit. I can get better wheels. I can get a faster bike. I can get a coach. I can actually get plated shoes. I can be faster at 70 than I was at 60. There's no reason for you to be thinking that, oh, this is as good as it gets. I'm never going to get any better. You can always get better. Plus, the other side from, I always call our sport the fountain of youth. It's something that's so special because when you're 60 or 70 years old, you tend to hang out with other people who are 60 or 70 years old, and all they're talking about is the medication they're on or the guy who just died. Rather than if you're doing triathlon, you're hanging out with young people. You're hanging out with people like yourself who are thinking about the future, thinking about great things. And that if you want to stay young, you hang out with young people. That's what keeps you young. That's what keeps you passionate and loving what you do. There is not a better sport. When I see kids and I think about myself when I was a kid, I was really hyperactive. Triathlon would have been the perfect sport for me when I was a kid. Because, you get in the water and you're swimming and it's fun, and then it gets old and your shoulders start to hurt and you're going, oh, I'm done. And then you get on the bike and you're like, it takes you a while to loosen up, and then you loosen up, then you're starting to feel good. Then your neck gets sore and it's like, oh, I'm done. And then you start the run and your legs feel like crap, right? And when you first start the run, and then they loosen up and you feel good and you're done. And then when you're old enough, you're in a beer garden at 9 a.m. And there's just nothing better than our sport. Seriously, it's a sport that changes you for the better. That's my concern for the sport has been that we all got into it as a lifestyle and have stayed in it as a lifestyle. My concern is people come in and decide, I want to be an Ironman and get my Ironman tattoo. And they come in, they hire a coach, and in 6 months, they do a 70.3 or a full, and then they move on to something else. And I think they're missing out on everything that our sport brings to the table, the community, the amazing people you get to hang out with, the fact that, hey, when you're going, I have people all the time who reach out who I haven't seen in 20 years. Well, they took the last 20 years of working on their family, working on their doctorate, working on stuff, but they were still swimming, biking, and running. They weren't racing, and now they're coming back. And the sport is always there for you. Whatever part of your life you're in, you can come back and join back up and create and get back with with the folks that you want to hang out with.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We did talk about this a couple of weeks ago about how I think we're in a very, very good moment for the sport because we've got all the different organizations in triathlon, Ironman, Challenge, PTO, World Triathlon, all of them pretty aligned in trying to make the sport better. And yeah, I think that despite the organizations, wanted to put more events together, making it more accessible to everyone, making more fun events around the actual races. We spoke about how, for example, Challenge Salou organized all these different activities around family members for the athletes, so that Friday and Saturday they are part of the show as well. But I think it has to go beyond that, because as coaches, you've just said it, right? We get so many questions and so many inquiries about how the classic scenario of, someone reaches out to you and says, I want to do an Ironman in 6 months' time. And you ask them what's their background, and they say, well, I swam a little bit when I was a kid. Haven't done anything for the last 20 years or so. And and that short-term goal or short-term vision from a lot of people, one, obviously, with the huge exposure that the sport is having, is bringing more people into it. But I think that it's our responsibility as well to share, as you said, like this way of living, that mentality and that passion about the sport, where we actually get them more engaged with the lifestyle, not just the get to the finish line, right? As you just said, some people, even if we are not racing, we will still be out there training, right? And I think that's a very good point, because we do see that. We do see that a lot in, for example, in Spain. We see that nowadays federations are putting a lot of issues and there are less events. It's a bit more tricky to race, but probably the number of licenses are still going up and up every year. And you think, how is that possible? There are less events, but more people practicing the sport. And maybe not for long distance, because obviously not everybody can do it, at least straight away, I would say, from a coaching point of view. But I do think that we do need to make sure that we own that responsibility of sharing and educating people on what the sport means and how to do it correctly.
Well, the most important, I always call the race director the endangered species of our sport. It's very difficult to be a race director. You just think about the fact that you're waking up in the morning. I've had people over time say, hey, I love this sport. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I want to make a living in this sport. And I tell them, you know what? Keep your day job. Keep doing what you're doing, because what happens, you get into putting on an event. Do you want to wake up in the morning knowing you're responsible for the safety of 3,000 people? I mean, that's can be overwhelming. So the key for me is, one, to understand that, Ironman and Challenge and the long distance events are great, but the welcome mat for our sport is the short distance races, the pool triathlons, the Olympic, the sprint. And if you're a coach, make sure that you're incorporating those shorter distance races with the people who are training for Ironman at 70.3. Don't forget about our roots. Make sure that those race directors are being taken care of who are putting on those short distance races. Because, see, the longer distance races are going to impact the city. The city is, starting with Rock and Roll Marathon and then with Ironman, if you're a long distance event, you're going to a city and saying, I'm going to bring you 2,000 people who are going to stay in hotels during this weekend. That's business, right? That's really good business. So the cities pay to bring an Ironman or a challenge event to that city. And if they're paying, now they're giving you help with police costs, fire costs. So they're getting a lot of their costs underwritten. The people who aren't are the local race directors who are putting the short distance races on, because there's not the huge hotel revenue that you're getting from the longer distance races. People aren't traveling to come do a local sprint race. So those people are the ones who need our help and support all the time, because they are the welcome mat and the way that people find our sport.
Yeah, good. Nice one. With regards to short distance, we see a lot of people always focusing on, I want to do the Ironman, but there's no being ashamed of not completing an Ironman or a long distance event and sticking to short or Olympic distance or even a half Ironman, where that might be enough sometimes, and a lot of people is forgetting about that. And actually, as you said, like that camaraderie that comes from the shorter events, everybody's sticking around afterwards and enjoying, whether it's a beer or a meal or a coffee, whatever people want. Sometimes you don't have that in those long events, because everybody obviously finishes at completely different times. And I think that social aspect is also there, which is quite important.
Very important. It's what I love is when we go to the races here in San Diego or in LA, and you're done by 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, and
Hmm.
you're at the beer garden, you're hanging out with your friends. That's a huge part of why we do what we do. I mean, usually myself and the other guys in the 60 to death category, we're always there really early, and it's like, well, why are we doing this? Because we can, right?
Yeah.
Because you can do this forever. And it's a way to reconnect with your buddies on a weekly or every other weekly basis. And also, you get 25, 30-year-olds there, and when they get passed by somebody with a 70 on their calf, they're like, crap, I want to do this the rest of my life. This is pretty cool. One of my favorite stories, we were doing a race, and I passed this guy, and I could hear him sort of under his breath go, crap, because he saw at that time I was probably 60. And the guy behind me, a guy named Hans Diebin, was 75. And then he went by both of us, and you could hear the guy go, shit. I can't believe it's like, here's this 75-year-old guy just passed me. I'm 30, right? It's like, oh my God. So that's what I love about it is a fountain of youth. It is something that you can do forever and continue to get better and better and better.
Yes, I'm not gonna lie. I think when you see someone like that is whether in the 60, 70 age group category, and you see them still doing the sport and how happy they look and how healthy they look, it's like, oh, I want to do that. I want to get to that age and still maybe I don't do this races because for whatever reason, but I want to get to that point where I can still put myself in that start line. And I remember in 2022 when Hiroshi, I can't remember his surname, the Japanese guy that
Yep.
beat the
80.
his own record
Yep.
in it.
Yeah.
I was completely amazed by yeah, how he was still loving it and how he was so cheerful and enjoying it more than even as people like me who could be there for, aiming for a specific time. And I'm like, well, who cares about a specific time when you can do this for until his age and still be coming to Kona for this race?
And it used to be that races would have age divisions up to 50. Then they go 50 plus because there weren't that many people doing it, right? So there was a guy here in Southern California named Bill Bell, and Bill would come to the races. And Bill started in the sport when he was in his 50s. So when he turned 70, they had made it so it was 50, 54, 55, 59, 60, 64, 65 plus, right? And so when Bill got to be like 66, 67, he's like, Bob, I can't compete with these 65-year-olds. What happens when I'm 70? So then USA Tri added, 65, 69, 70 to 74, 75, 79. Then Bill turned 80. And it's like it became 75 plus. Now they're seriously age divisions 90, 94, 95, 99. They're going all the way up because
Mhm.
there's athletes in those divisions. When you look at the shorter distance races, you've got full fields in 80,
Yeah,
84, 85, 89. What other sport does that? I don't think so, right? Maybe some runners, but it's primarily triathlon that's doing that.
yeah, yeah. There are not many other cases in sport, definitely.
No.
Okay, so one quick question that I wanted to ask you regarding Ironman specific events is you've been a quite open supporter about Kona going back to 1 day for men and women, and finally we've got that. We've got a big change in within the Ironman brand with Scott DeRue, who we spoke about how well we think that he's doing and how he's been really good to the sport and to the organization and getting going back to just 1 day with fewer people, men and women. I think that's definitely something that we have to celebrate and to look forward to in 2026.
I couldn't be happier. I was hoping that it would get done. And it's a family. We're a family. And probably my favorite year in Kona was the year we had two races. We had the women racing on Thursday and the men racing on Saturday, and it was wonderful. You had 6,000 people, but the island couldn't handle it. It was just too many people for the island. They don't have the volunteer base to handle two races. So you can't handle two races. Seriously, if COVID had not happened, 2020 would have been the same as 2019. Men and women racing in Kona. COVID was the culprit here, and we were sort of forced. Ironman was forced to, because they couldn't put on an event in 2020, they couldn't put on one in 2021. They had all the folks were part of the legacy program who had qualified. They had a backlog of athletes, and St. George stepped up in a big way, and then it went with Nice and Kona. I think that stuff had to happen, but now that COVID is done, there's really no reason not to be back in Kona with one day of racing with as many people as possible that they can put on the course. It's the Mecca. Nice is wonderful. St. George is wonderful, but they're not Kona. Kona has history. And as someone who wrote the coffee table books on the 25th, 30th, and 40th anniversary of Ironman, I hope that history means something. You want to talk to Jan Frodeno about running in the energy lab and turning around in Hawi and swimming in Kailua Bay. That's what the Ironman World Championship is all about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I was lucky to be racing in 2022, both in St. George and Kona. And then I was in 2023 at Nice as a coach in that occasion. And let's be honest, I do think that St. George and Nice did an amazing job putting the events. And I really, really enjoyed my time in both places, both locations. But there was something missing. For me, there was something completely out of place. And you could see even in people's faces, like you could realize that it wasn't
Right.
Kona. It wasn't going back to the beginnings, to the essence of the Hawaiian island, the environment, the atmosphere. I remember when I first landed in Kona, for example, you could see it in people's faces that, okay, here's where people wants to be. And I was missing that in St. George and Nice, for example. Yes, of course, it's a world championship. You've got the best of the world racing, and that's always something to look forward to. But I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of a purist in this way, but I think that, yeah, I couldn't be happier, and definitely gives me a goal to go back in 2026, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, no, there's something so unique about just every aspect of the Ironman World Championship in Kona, Hawaii. And that's where it needs to be. The Masters in golf is in Augusta, right? The Tour de France is in France. You don't move things to other places unless Ironman had to. They didn't have an option. But
Yeah,
now that option, now that you can be back in Kona with everybody together, that's what you want. And I
yeah,
loved the year we had the women racing in Kona. On there, it was Lucy won, and women were stopping the cheer for her. It was the feeling of solidarity of the women racing was wonderful. But again, it's a family, and what I felt bad for was men and women who were couples or married, and both of them qualified. What do you
yeah.
do? You one and the expense for sponsors and supporters to go to two venues for the same event. It's really, really expensive. So at some point it had to go back, and I'm just glad that they made that decision sooner rather than later.
hmm Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And to some extent, we've got Ironman 70.3 walls rotating to different
Yep.
locations. We've got Nice over the next couple of years, which I think is probably one of the greatest venues we could have. Um,
Yep.
but yeah, for full distance, Kona is Kona. It sums up to that. Um,
Yes.
Plus, which is one of the last bits that I want to get some time from you for. We can keep having breakfast with Bob at its original location. And the most
Exactly.
important thing, we can have Pancho Man on it.
Exactly. Having Poncho Man, being back at Huggles on the Rocks, that's the way it should be.
Yeah, because on that note, with going to breakfast with Bob show, when did it actually started? How did you come to with the idea of starting to interview the week before and the after event afterwards, after the race finished? Get some of the professionals interviewed.
So really, it was back in 2009, 2010 era where we started doing, and this is when This is after a competitor had been purchased, and we also own Triathlete magazine. So it was I started doing interviews at Huggos, and back then, if we did 5, 6 interviews a day, I was like, "Whoo, that's a long day. That's a lot of interviews." Then this, I think when we had the men and women racing together, I think we did 70 interviews over that like 10 days. So it sort of grew from there, and then started doing the championship edition at the Four Seasons Hualalai. They were amazing. They would bring our top 3 men and women to the hotel, and we were shooting in one of their villas, which I think was, like $17,000 a day or something like that. And what was wonderful for the pros they came with their whole family, and Four Seasons Walleye provided breakfast for everybody. And then for the champions, their bakery chef made a special cake, an entire chocolate sculpture for the champion. And in 2018, when Daniela got stung by a jellyfish, they actually had a jellyfish on the chocolate jellyfish on the cake. And it's really cool. Our athletes deserve that type of treatment, being treated like that. And last year, Patrick Lenge took his sculpture to the volunteer party on Monday night, and
Mhm.
volunteers helped him devour it. It was very cool.
Nice. I didn't know that, for example. So what we always have this joke about that a professional has made it into sport when he goes to get into an interview with you at Breakfast with Bob. Um, do you actually go through the start list and pick some of the pros, or do
Oh
you
yeah.
do you get try to get as many as you can, or
What I love is, well, I'm standing here looking out at about 50 notebooks of notes on different athletes. So yeah, I did. This year was one of the most difficult because in the past, you sort of had the usual suspects. You knew you had Sebi, you had Patrick, you had Jan, you had Lionel. You sort of knew the folks who were going to be a factor. Well, this last year, before I started doing research, I didn't know Menno Koolhaas. I didn't know anything about a lot of these guys, but the more research I did, you looked at they went to Frankfurt and they swam 48 and they rode 4 hours and then they ran 2:38. I'm like, oh my, who are these people? So this last year I really felt was like a changing of the guard because I think Menno was fifth, and we like out of the top 17 people, I think 16 of them were on the show, and a lot of them I didn't know anything about before I started doing research on them. But it's like this person's going to be a factor. This person is going to be really special. So the nice thing, if you think about going back to with Competitor Magazine in the '80s, I covered Dave Scott's career from 1980 when we both did the Oahu race through 1996 when he did his last Ironman, and then was fortunate enough to the first time that Jan Frodeno came over to Kona. Was there when he got third the first time he was there, and then when he won for the last time there in 2019. So I basically covered his entire career there. Daniela Reef sat with us at Breakfast with Bob in 2014, and she got there like on Wednesday of race week, and we're sitting there, and she goes, "This Ali'i Drive, is this where we run?" Right? And it's like, yeah, this is where you're going to run, right? And this is like someone who's going to become a legend of the sport and winning 5 Ironman world titles, 5 70.3 world titles, and seeing them there for the very first time, and then not being able to cover their entire career. It's pretty awesome. And so now there's all these other amazing young women and guys who are going to be our factors for the next decade. That's really fun to see.
and it definitely keeps us entertained as well, because what we need to do is keep researching and watching different events in shorter distances, as we spoke the other day. How PTO is becoming almost like that middle step towards
Mhm.
70.3 and full distance, and you see the guys, especially now with not being an Olympic year, and they are not within that qualification process to the Olympics in LA in 2028. Some of them stepping into 70.3s, and we see that some of the people who are maybe ranked beyond 50, 60, even 80 or 100 on the PTO rankings are definitely going to be contenders, and people might not have heard of them, but you think, oh wow, there's something about this this kid or this woman who is definitely interesting to keep an eye on, and
Oh
definitely
yeah.
keep us entertained. And
Well,
I
and the
would say
cool,
that, going back to what you said, like if you have that passion to look at for all of them and keep interested on them, it's definitely a good
well,
time for the sport.
it's really fun to watch when we were in Daytona in 2020 for the one race during COVID. And here's this
Magnus.
Magnus Detlef, right? Here's Magnus. And what always impresses me is people who are not afraid. And if you think about the change in our sport, it used to be that people focused on trying to make the Olympics, if they made it or not, throughout their 20s, and then they'd move into longer distance, right? That's not happening now. Guys are 21, 22, and they're saying, I don't care about the Olympics, or I don't swim well enough to be a factor there, and I'm gonna focus on my strengths. I'm a great cyclist runner. So you're seeing all these guys who are coming in going 2 hours for 70.3 bike ride and 4 hours for full bike ride, and you're going, oh my God, these guys are all going to be a factor. So it's really an amazing era because you're seeing such phenomenal athletes, and nobody is afraid. Rico Bogan isn't afraid to go off the front. And it doesn't matter if he's 23 years old. It doesn't matter at all. And it was really fun to see with Christian Hogenhog, because if you watch his interview in Shamarin, you could tell. I mean, he went to Texas and he was 20th. I think, you start to have little doubts. I'm 33 years old. Am I going to still be a factor? I'm 20th in Texas. But if you looked at his times and you saw his swim and his bike were spectacular, he didn't have a good day on the run in Texas. Well, he comes to Shamarin, and he has a great day swim, bike, and run. And so the competition is so tight now. There's not a huge gap between athletes that if you're a little off, you're done, right? You have a bad run and you're off the back. So you have to be spot on every time you go to the line, which is fun. But I love the athletes who are not afraid of the moment. I mean, how many times did Magnus go off the front in those races and had new GI issues over and over and over again? Well, you don't know about that until you put yourself in the wind, until you put yourself in harm's way and find out if you can handle it or not. And then next thing you know, he's going off the front and winning everything. So
Yeah.
that's what I love seeing.
I remember that during the conversation that we had, we spoke about how on 2017, when Sebastian Kienle won in Hawaii, we actually spoke about how he knew that biking was his strength, and he, on the interview that you did a few days before, he actually said, well, you've got to be willing to lose the race in order to win it.
Yes.
And you made a really valid point, and really, I remember when Christian Hogenhaug won in Salou 2021, actually the year after COVID. And he actually did a strategy that was pretty similar to Summer last year, a couple of weeks ago. He went off the front, never looked back. And he just like, well, I'm gone. If you follow me. If not, we'll see what happens. And the same has happened with so many athletes over the last few races, I could say, maybe a couple of years, with, as you say, with the youngers coming up into the sport, long distance. But I find it really interesting that on a time where we got all the data, we've got all the different gadgets to analyze, train better, nutrition, so many different aspects. At the end of the day, it comes down to who is following their guts and who is just going for it. And
and if you think about, for Christian, he hadn't won a race since 2022. So
yeah,
2023, 2024, you start questioning, do I still have it? And, and then you start questioning, gosh, because every training session isn't great. You don't leave every training session feeling like, oh my God, that was spot on. I'm right. I'm on fire. You go into that race with a fair amount of unknown. And so here Christian goes into, Shamarin with some unknown. And obviously he's done well there before, but you know what? Winning is a different gig. And it takes something special to do that. And he had some great runners behind him.
Yeah.
So off the bike. So you really have to wonder. You wonder what goes through people's heads. I remember one time Jan Frodeno had won. He won in 15 and 16. And I think it was in 16. We were interviewing him after a race at Four Seasons at the championship edition. And it said, you seemed like you were in control. He says, I was ready to drop out 14 times. Ready to drop out 14 times. I felt like I just didn't have it. So the doubts that our own, your legends have, they're questioning. Or if you talk to Mark Allen about the 95 year, when he came back and ran down Thomas Hellriegel, who was 12, 13 minutes ahead of him. He's thinking early in the run, this is my last race. I've won this thing 5 times. My condo's right there. It'd be really easy just to go to the condo. But then, one little thing happens. He sees Greg Welch stop and stretch. And so now he's going, okay, maybe there is a chance. Next thing you know, he's winning his 6th and final title and you don't get that mic drop very often where your last race is a win, right? That's what, if Jan Frodeno had won in Nice a couple of years ago, he would have gone out the same way, right? Hey, drop the mic, I'm out. But you know what? When you have that opportunity like Mark did to go out on your own terms and never race again, that's pretty. Chrissy Wellington, last time Chrissy Wellington race, 2011, has a 2-minute lead over Mirinda. She retires, and it's funny because this is probably before your time. So 2010, Chrissy has won 2007, 8, and 9. She's going 2010, 3-time champion, going for number 4. No question she's going to get it. Well, she's sick. She doesn't go to the start. Mirinda's in the racks, and there's Chrissy's bike, but no Chrissy. And she's like talking to her coach, Siri, what do I do? It says, no change, just go do it. So now she wins. So now 2011 is the defending champion, Mirinda Carfrae, against the 3-time champion, Chrissy Wellington. And that made the women's race so much more important than the guys' race, because it was like these 2 women who are, Mirinda just won, Chrissy won before. That was the battle. And then on that, a couple weeks before, Chrissy had crashed, so she was compromised and had an over an hour swim. And I was with her parents out by Javi, and her family was freaking out. It's like, why is Chrissy so far back? What's going on? She'd been off the front. Every year she won by more. And now she's behind. And it's like, oh my God, this is a race. So because it was a race, because Chrissy had to dig so deep to win by 2 minutes, 2 minutes is all she won by, she knew that she had that battle that she had craved. So at the end of that race, she didn't say it right then, but within a couple months, I'm retiring. The byproduct of that is Mirinda, when she won in 2010, she took care of a lot of sponsors that year. Maybe didn't come to Kona in 2011 quite as ready to defend her title as she might have been. So thinking to herself, okay, I get second, I'll go get Chrissy next year. But there was no next year. Chrissy was gone. I think Mirinda's motivation, she ended up getting, third the following year, because her motivation was Chrissy. Chrissy's not racing. How am I motivated? Well, all these there's so many little things out there that inside the race that you don't know about that can change things in a second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. But I have to say, what Miranda did the year after, again, to go with those, I think it was 13 minutes in T2.
Oh, with Daniela?
With Daniela, yeah.
Yeah. It was, and it was, 2013. She came from behind. Yeah. And then, so she won Leanna Cave won in 12. And then Mirinda got 13 and 14. And then, so 13.
It was 14 the year that she
had 14 was the year with Daniela.
14. Yeah.
And then Daniela won 15, 16, 17, 18. And then she won in St. George for her 5th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. So Having met so many professionals, both men and women, could you name just one or maybe two, one man and one woman, that you could say he is definitely the most impressive or more inspirational or, the greatest personality? We obviously always had this debate about who is the GOAT of our sport in men and women's
Mhm.
fields. But from your personal opinion, obviously
Yeah,
having known them from the interviews and more, not just
sure.
from results, but also their mentality, like how they look into the sport. Could you say this person actually stands out?
Sure. So for me, because everything is based on Ironman, there was Dave Scott for the men. Just because, and I think Mark Allen would say this as well. Dave didn't go to the starting line racing anybody but Dave Scott. He went to that starting. If you think about it, he won in 80. And think about this: 80, 82, 83, 84, 86, 87, and those were his wins. And then I think he got second three times and then a fifth. So from 1980 to 1996, 16 years, this guy, and he said he didn't race in 88, and there was a boycott. Mark Allen, Dave Scott didn't race in 85 because there was no prize money. But every year that he went to the starting line, the guy was always going to be a factor. And if you think about, he was the first guy under, when he won, the existing winning time was 11:15 from Tom Warren. He went 9:23. So he was the first guy under 11, first guy under 10 and a half, first guy under 10, first guy under 9 and a half, first guy under 9, first guy under 8:30. In the marathon, he was the first guy to go under 3 hours, first guy under 2:55, first guy under 2:50, right? And there was just something about Dave where he was, I'm going to go as hard as I can for as long as I can and try to stop me, which makes what happened in 89 with Dave and Mark so impressive,
The Iron
because
War.
the Iron War, because in Iron War, they were 1 second apart after the swim, 1 second apart after the bike. They were side by side to a mile 23 and a half. And Dave's course record was 8:28. On that day, he went 8:10. He took 18 minutes off his course record. The run course record was 2:49. He ran 2:41, 8 minutes off the run course record, and lost. So on the greatest day he ever had, Mark Allen was 58 seconds better. That's pretty cool. I mean,
Yeah.
and then when Dave, he didn't race in 89 was his, he raced, he didn't race in 90, 91, 92, 93, comes back in 94, really after 6 years away, and gets second to Greg Welch at the age of 40. And back then, 40-year-old, you were like in a walker. You weren't thinking somebody in a 40-year-old can be competitive 6 years away, and the guy gets second place. And then 2 years later, comes off the bike in like 25th or 26th place, runs his way to fifth, runs a 2:45 marathon at the age of 42. So this is a guy who is always changing perceptions. If when I think of Roger Bannister breaking the 4 minute mile,
Oh, yeah.
Dave Scott was that guy. He was the guy who changed everything in Kona. On the woman's side,
And I would also say there, which is it was on a time where we didn't have all the fancy bikes, all the carbon shoes, all the
right?
technology. It was pure guts and pure training and just who wanted it more, really. I remember on
Yeah.
the book of Iron War, they were saying like both of them, Mark and Dave, they set off to run suicidal pace, really, where they knew that they were going well beyond what had been achieved beforehand. But it was, well, whoever had to slow down first, and they both committed to that, and they found their limits in a way
Yes.
that it hasn't been done before. So, yeah, that's well, I had never thought about Dave Scott in that regards, but yeah, I guess that you are totally right.
And back in the day, there was also, the United States Triathlon Series that started in '82. And, Dave, anytime he went to the starting line, he won the first ever USTS race. So, back then you had to be diversified. You had to be able to do long distance and short distance because there was only one Ironman in the US that was in Kona, Hawaii. So there weren't a ton of other Ironman. All the other Ironman events were in, Japan and Germany and places like that. But, Dave, my favorite was he went to Japan, and his wife was about to have a baby. So the plan was he wasn't going to do the whole race. He was going to do the swim and maybe do a bike ride, but he pumped his tires up to like 120 pounds of pressure, figuring out flat, something's going to happen. And he ended up going 8:01. And it was like, this is like 80, I think it might have been 89, might have been the same year as Iron War. But he didn't never race with a watch. So he came around the last turn and saw the time. And, at that point, 8:01 was effing believable. He was just in a different world. But his knee was messed up. His wife was about to have a baby. He figured, I don't even know if I can run or not. And he goes 8:01. That's what made that guy so special. It made him really special. And on a woman's side, again, from a Kona perspective, I look at Paula just because, 8 times, and she had a rival in this Aaron Baker. And there was a period there where, Paula won 8 times, Aaron won 2. And every time you went to the starting line, it was those 2 that you were thinking about. But for that short period of her amazing career, Chrissy Wellington went to a starting line in an iron distance race 13 times and won 13 races, right? She won every
Ironman event that she did, yeah.
Ironman, Roth. When she ran, before plated shoes, she ran 2:44 and won 8:18 at Challenge Roth, right? And she had gone 8:19.
That record actually standed for until not long ago, really.
She broke that record. Daniela broke her record, and it was cool because Daniela was there. I mean, Chrissy was there. Yeah. Daniela came across the line a couple of years ago. It was very, very cool. And then Annie Hogg shattered that last year in Roth. But I think that Paula rightfully is a queen of Kona because of her racing. And what I loved about it, the year she collapsed in 95, when she collapsed and finished 4th, the following year she came back and she always went off the front. And she decided, you know what? I'm not going to go off the front. I'm going to sit back and mix it up with the other girls and see what happens. I'm not planning to win. And she ended up winning, because she ended up running with Natasha Bodman, and they ran side by side, and Paula loved it. Rather than being out there off the front and have a target on her back, she was racing, and she was racing with Natasha and ended up dropping Natasha and winning her 8th and final Ironman World Championship title. It was very cool to watch.
Yeah, I could definitely say that on the women's field, which unfortunately we know that maybe in the past they didn't get the exposure that the men's side had, but there's been some really, really great racing on the women's field. And yeah, for people who has loved the sport and actually, got to the sport through watching Ironman events, not and knowing anything about sprint and Olympic distance, which is my case. I remember and yeah, it was impressive to watch the women's field, sometimes even more than the men's side. So yeah.
Well, and with Daniela, I mean, having 5 Ironman world titles and 5 70.3 world titles, my favorite was that with Brett Sutton as her coach, she was looking to go to her 3rd Olympics, and she had finished 7th, I think, in her first one, and then the second one not well, and then Ironman Switzerland was coming up. She wanted to do the Olympic distance there. Brett Sutton wanted her to do the full, and the compromise, which you do both. So she wins the sprint, the Olympic, and then she wins the full, then she goes to Kona and gets, she got 2nd, and that sort of changed everything, and she became one of the greatest long distance athletes, kicking and screaming. She didn't want to go long. Chrissy didn't want to go long. Brett Sutton saw something in both of those athletes before they saw it in themselves. So, and he's Julie Duran, and he's still working with some amazing athletes who I think Julie Duran is going to be a factor in Kona in years to come.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. Well, we've been chatting for nearly an hour now. I know that you're a busy person and that you already have given us a lot of your time. So I've only got one last question for you.
Okay.
Which is, when are we going to see you next time in Europe in another event? And if we do a survey, we get X amount of people signed up for it, could you bring Pancho Man with you? This is something that a couple of persons have asked me to mention on the podcast here. So
we can. We'll be at Challenge Roth. We'll be at Challenge Roth. We'll be there for sure. Probably a little late to try to book Pancho over there and find him. Potentially for Spain for 70.3 Worlds. Maybe we'll try to do that.
Well, hopefully I'll see you at both of them, and
love it.
And hopefully in Marbella I'll see Pancho as well.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for the time, Pablo. Pleasure
Thanks
to
to
chat.
you. I know that. Yeah, I really appreciate your time. Your chat. Our chat in Samorin, and I could speak for hours with you. Obviously, you're like an encyclopedia of triathlon, so it's a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob.